8th, 2014, and we're chatting with Dudley Goodlette. Dudley, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to be a lawyer?
Well, I grew up in Naples, of course. My family moved here 60 years ago. I was 6 years old at that time. My dad was in the broadcast business, took a job, moved our family from Hazard, Kentucky to Naples, Florida. And with the exception of being away to school and some time spent in the military, I've been here ever since. Early on in my childhood, I thought I wanted to be in the ministry or a preacher. My dad eloquently talked me out of that and suggested that maybe a law school education would be something I might want to pursue. And as it turned out, practicing law really fit my limited skills very well.
What was Naples like when you first moved here? What year would that have been?
We moved here in 1954, and there was a grand total of one red light in Naples. It's now affectionately the Four Corners. It wasn't necessarily red or green. It was probably yellow most of the time because there wasn't much traffic to control. But it was a very small community, probably 5,000 people in the metropolitan, in the coastal area of Collier County. I started first grade. I'm proud to say I finished in 12 years. Finished high school, the 12 grades in 12 years. And then it was a real small community, obviously, but it over the years, the 60 years that I've been here, the community has maintained or retained its charm and its character that really had back then, in my judgment. And my dad was, as I said, in the broadcasting business, so he put wonderful Naples on the Gulf, WNOG, on the air as the general manager back in 1954. So he became a sort of a local person to know back in those days.
And isn't Goodlette Frank Road named for your dad?
It is named after him. My dad was after leaving the broadcasting business went into the real estate business, brokerage business, and found his way to seeking and was elected to the Board of County Commissioners in the late 1950s, and remained there for, I guess, 4 years or 8 years. And but the road was named after him because he thought Naples eventually, someday, would need a way to bypass 41 because the two-lane 41 would be too crowded. And anyway, Goodlette Road was named after him for some of those reasons.
And then you went to the University of Florida Law School, correct?
Went to University of Florida Law School. Went to when I graduated from Naples High School in 1966, went to United States Military Academy to West Point for less than a year. I wasn't quite the math whiz out of high school that I needed to be scholastically competitive at the West Point. So but as a result of that, I had a military commitment, a 5-year military commitment as a result of receiving an appointment to West Point. And ended up going to Eastern Kentucky undergraduate where they had an ROTC program because I had the choice after leaving West Point of going into an ROTC program or going into to Vietnam, probably.
So, and then from Eastern Kentucky, did you go straight to law school?
Yeah, straight through law school. I started law school in September with Judge Hugh Hayes in September of 1970, and finished in December of 1972. And when Hugh and Nancy graduated from Judge Hayes, they graduated from law school, we ended up spending a few days in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, in the military together before we both came back here were both in, I guess, were admitted to the bar in May of 1973 and commenced practice sometime thereafter.
And did you ever give any thought to practicing any place else other than returning to Naples?
No, I never did. I was fortunate to have been raised here. I loved the community. I loved the role that my parents played in sort of in helping develop the formative years of the community, and this has always been home to me.
Where did you start out as a lawyer?
I started with the Vega firm. It was Carol Vega Brown, maybe at that time. It may have been Carol Vega Nichols Brown. I'm not sure, but it was George Vega's firm. And one of my early introductions to the practice of law was, like most young lawyers, I walked a few of George Vega's dogs across the street when a case needed to be tried that had very little chance of winning.
So you started out doing some litigation work.
I did, obviously an associate in a relatively small, although for Naples standards, was a larger firm at that time. I think Judge Hayes was started with the Treadwell Emerson firm at about the same time I started with the Vega firm, and there were probably not more than 5 or 6 firms in Naples at that time that had more than 3 lawyers. I don't recall the specifics, but yes, I mean, as the newest associate in a firm, I was encouraged to do everything that needed to be done as a general practitioner to service the needs of the clients.
What do you remember about your first days on the job as a lawyer?
Oh, Judge, I remember what an honorable profession the law is. I was so proud to have an opportunity to go to law school and to finish, to pass the bar exam. And I think probably one of the proudest moments of my life has been when I walked into the law firm after leaving the military, and for my first day at work, I couldn't wait to get started, and I've loved every day of it since, frankly.
And what do you remember about the members of the bar and the local bar association when you first got started?
It was very collegial. Obviously, very few. I don't think there probably weren't more than 35 active practitioners practicing law when I started in 1973, and it was a very collegial group. Most all of us who were younger lawyers at the time immediately joined the local bar association. I think I was the president of the local bar association in 1976, so I had only been practicing law for 3 years or so before having the honor of serving as president of the bar association.
How did you attract clients when you were first starting out?
Well, I think that some of the partners in the Vega firm were attracting most of the clients, and I was providing, was trying to do the legal work necessary to meet their needs. But I also had, because of my family roots and my dad's involvement on the Board of County Commissioners, as I mentioned, I had a few people who were calling me from the very beginning, wanting to welcome me back to Naples, and wanting to know if I could help them with a real estate matter or a family law matter or whatever, a probate or issue. And unfortunately, that firm had enough depth and breadth to meet the needs of all of those inquiries.
Ultimately, you made your career in real estate law, correct?
Yeah, I was board certified real estate lawyer for many years. Served as the chairman of the certification committee of the real property probate and trust law section, or real property. I guess it was the real property certification, and then your separate was probate and trust, etc. But I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
Ultimately, you
real estate.
You went into the real estate area.
I did. That became my niche once I was with the Vega firm for about 18 months. Then I went and worked with Bob Ninus and Don Frankie for a couple of years, and that's when I really segued into doing almost real estate exclusively, because either Don Frankie or Bob Ninus was handling most of the courtroom activity across the street, and then I moved in with Danny Shriver and Bob Hageman shortly after that, and then again focused on real estate and more development, land use. That was really sort of the bread and butter of my practice until I was elected to the legislature and became a sort of a more of a part-time lawyer. And probably my partners at Kevin Colvin and Ken Johnson would probably tell you I was less than part-time when I was in the legislature, because I wasn't able to spend that much time in the law office. That was beginning in 1998.
You were a part of a tremendous amount of growth in Naples. Can you just share with us some of your observations about that and what that was like?
Well, it was we had a pretty well defined camps of people who were growth or no growth back in the late '60s, early '70s, and so we had. There were some people who had found Naples and they wanted to pull up the gate, and so there were some of those kinds of challenges, particularly in dealing with land use related, development related matters, whether they were generally before the Board of County Commissioners, but occasionally before the City of Naples elected officials, and so it was a very important balance that I think was struck here in Collier County in the late '60s and early '70s to try to not let growth be uncontrolled, but at the same time encouraging young families like mine, like I was, to come back to Naples and to have a career opportunity here.
What sort of changes have you seen in the practice of law over the years in Collier County?
Gee, Bill, as we're sitting here in 2014, I haven't really been practicing law other than for a couple of clients on either government relations or a limited legal engagement for the last 5 years, and for the 10 years prior to that, I was pretty distracted by the legislative matters. I was the chief of staff for the Speaker of the House for a period of time, and so I haven't really been engaged in the practice of law actively for the last 12, 14 years. But for me, it never deviated from being the profession that I was so honored to join in 1973 when I was admitted to the bar. There were, you have a few skirmishes along the way with other members of the bar, but being a real estate lawyer, real estate is not really an adversarial relationship, and maybe that's one of the reasons that I gravitated to real estate law as something to focus my time and attention on, because it was generally, people are happy to buy places, and people who are selling are happy to sell them, and so it really fit my personality to be in that real estate silo.
When you look back on your career and or your time in Naples in general, from 6 years old to today, are there any unforgettable characters or persons that really stand out to you that you encountered?
Oh wow! I mean, there's so many. I'm hesitant to start naming them off, but I guess the first one would be Judge Harold Smith. I remember, again, walking a matter across the street from the Vega firm when I was a new practitioner, and I think I may have had on either my green suit or my yellow suit or my orange suit, and I remember distinctly Judge Smith telling me to never come to his courtroom again dressed like Clark Nichols.
Tell us more about Judge Smith. What do you remember about him?
Oh, he was a great friend of my father's. He was of course, a circuit judge. He was also, I believe, when my dad was on the Board of County Commissioners in the late '50s, Judge Smith was either the county attorney at the time, but he and my dad became fast friends. That's when the courthouse was relocated from Everglades City to Collier County, and in the early days, in the late '50s, to Naples, not to Collier County, from Everglades City to East Naples, to where it is today. A lot of tales of driving from Naples to Everglades City for those county commission meetings back in the '50s that my dad would tell me about were always fun to listen to, and I think generally probably true.
Tell us about what prompted the relocation
Of the courthouse. I think it was just the recognition that Naples was growing, that it was closer, obviously, to the coast, and it was just going to be it was going to be more in the nucleus or the center of activity, and when the Board of County Commissioners and I think Harmon Turner was the county manager back then. Gene Turner's father was the county manager then. I think there was a consensus that developed on the commission pretty quickly that at a point in time the county seat needed to be relocated to a place not quite as remote as Everglades City, for all the reasons that you would expect.
Wasn't there a hurricane along the way too?
There was a hurricane actually in September of 1960, and as I recall, they were in the process of building the new courthouse, and it was delayed because there were some challenges from the storm. I'm not sure whether it was the courthouse that was delayed or whether it was Naples High School's opening in what's now Naples High School's location. That was also delayed because of the hurricane and the natural events of those kinds of storms.
Is there any person or persons that you considered a mentor when you were starting out and even throughout your career?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously I have very high regard for George Vega. He's somebody that I, as a young lawyer, sought to emulate. I mean, he was successful. He was extremely well received by clients, by the court system, by the judges and the courthouse staff. So he was somebody that I sought to emulate as a young lawyer. But I also with the other Bob Ninus with whom I practice, and frankly Jim Elkins, whom I never had the privilege of practicing with as Judge Hayes did for a period of time, but he was somebody that I was always sought to be his caliber of lawyer and thoughtful advocate. So there's so many that I hesitate to start naming them, but those are a couple that come to my mind as a young lawyer just starting out in the practice here in Naples.
Were ethics and professionalism things that lawyers talked about when you were actively practicing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that was as an outgrowth of being involved in the local bar association. I mean, there wasn't, as a young lawyer growing up in Naples, there were very few commitments or opportunities that you had engaging with the counsel for the adverse party that you needed to really confirm anything in writing. I mean, someone's reputation was their stock in trade, and I'm sure I know that has evolved or has changed, and that naturally would as the number of lawyers practicing in a community increases. The need to follow up and confirm things in writing is necessary. But I know in the early days it was probably the exception to the rule. I'm not sure that the people who would advise young lawyers today would advise them to be quite as cavalier as maybe some of us were back in those days, at least in this community.
Lynn Hicks and Holly said the same thing. She said it was just your word, and right. There wasn't any need to confirm things in writing or anything. And I think she mentioned it was first encountered it when she was dealing with a lawyer from outside the area that all of a sudden you have to confirm things, put everything in writing, because it was just whatever your word was. Right. It was what happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that'll be a good one to put it together with hers.
To come back to your question on professionalism, right. I think that during the entire period of time since 1960 '73, when I started practicing law here, we've had an extremely well-respected bar. I think that we've had so many terrific lawyers who've practiced in this community with integrity and with honor, and I think the local bar association and the members of the bar should be very proud of that.
You mentioned in your earlier days you were off to court and handling cases in front of the judges. Is there any memorable case that you could share with us, or memorable courtroom experience?
I can remember handling a family law matter, and early in my career, probably within the first 18 months of my practicing law, and I can remember being very disturbed to learn that my client had shot his spouse, and so that was one of those experiences where I'm thinking to myself, well, probably family law is not an area of the practice that I want to specialize in long term, because that was an unnerving experience to get that message or from whomever at the time.
We've been asking people to comment about, give us their thoughts on lawyer advertising, which is something that has evolved over the course of your career. What are your thoughts about lawyer advertising?
Well, I think they're constitutional issues that have to be recognized. I think, of course, I had the privilege of serving on the Board of Governors of the Florida Bar from 1982 to 1986. And lawyer advertising was a very predominant issue in the bar statewide at that moment in time, and that's when it was more heavily regulated. That's when, I think, if I'm not mistaken, probably the first lawyer to advertise in Southwest Florida, to the best of my memory, was the associates in Bruce L. Shiner back in probably the late 1970s. I don't know exactly when Bruce started practicing, but he was the first one that I recall off the top of my head who ventured into the print media, or even the television media, to let people know that his professional services were available in those mediums.
If you could go back and do it over again, are there any things that you would do differently?
Not a one. I've been blessed. I mean, having the good fortune of having a family relocate from Hazard, Kentucky, to Naples, Florida in 1954. In the last 60 years since 1954, I mean, there are obviously in any lifetime there are peaks and valleys, but the peaks are so exceed the valleys that I can't think of a thing that I would really would change. I've been very, very blessed.
How about some advice for young lawyers, the folks that are just starting out? What would you tell them?
I would, again, coming back to the theme that we've been talking a little bit about, I would say, character counts. I think your word is your bond, and I think that young lawyers should be sensitive to the profession of law, not the business of law. Not that they're they can't be, that they are not linked. I mean, obviously, practicing law is a business, but I think I would encourage young lawyers, if I was talking with them in the third year of law school today, to always remember how the professionalism component of the business, and why we call it a profession, and I hope it will remain that way.
I think that was pretty good.
Good.
Anything that you wanted to that you thought you might share, that you thought people would be interested in, that I didn't give you a chance to talk about with the questions I was asking you?
Nothing to come to mind. I mean, I do know that when I was I didn't mention to you that before I came back here to practice law after leaving spending some time in the military in 1973. While I was in law school, I did do some clerking, and I clerked for Mike McDonald, Danny Shriver, as well as the Vega firm. I think I even did some research on one occasion from law school for Ben Parks.
Oh, well, let's talk about some of those
ago.
folks
Right.
a little bit then. So what are we still taping? Yeah, okay. All right, so tell us about some of the experiences you had during law school.
Well, I know I went directly. I was Judy and I were married in 1968. Our daughter Cindy was born in 1970, which was April, just before I started law school in that September. So I had we had a young child at the time. So I worked while I was in Gainesville at University of Florida Law School, and I went directly through. I started in September and finished in December 2 years later. So I didn't have the opportunity to take time off in the summer to clerk and to do the more traditional, what I think and hope is now the more traditional path. But when I did come back to Naples on weekends, or when Judy and I came back to Naples on weekends, back then I would have occasion to go into to the Shriver Hageman law office and do a little research with them on projects of theirs at the time. But most of my law clerk work was done remotely from Gainesville, in shipping information back to Mike or to Danny if they needed research done on a particular matter. Of course, we have a totally different age of electronic communications and ways to do research today that certainly did not exist back in when I was in law school.
How have you seen technology impact the practice of law?
Well, again, in the last 15, 12 years or so, I haven't practiced, so I haven't really seen that monumental shift that has taken place since the year 2000-ish until now. But I know that you just look at the e-filings and the courtroom and pleading practice is entirely different today, I'm sure, than it was back when I started practicing that many years ago.
What were the problems facing the Collier County Bar back when you were the president in the 70s?
Well, first of all, making sure that all the young lawyers joined the local bar. We had luncheons every month. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there were six members of the class that entered law school with me in September at University of Florida in September of 1970, who practiced law, started their practice here in Naples within 8 months of when I started practicing law here in Naples. So Naples was becoming a very familiar and desirable venue for lawyers graduating from law school back in that time frame. Gee whiz, Jeffrey Manns and Holt Garver and Hugh Hayes and myself and gosh, I'm leaving too many out, but there were at least 6 or 7 of us who were in the same law school class who found our way back to Naples in the early 70s.
So recruiting them for the bar was one of your objectives?
That was, well, there were some familiar faces that we knew from sitting across the classroom from one another, and so we would encourage them to get involved in the local bar, and we obviously, to the extent that the judges needed the support of the local bar association in their endeavors, that's what our association was designed to and engaged to assist in.
You mentioned some interesting experiences already. Any particular crazy story about the practice of law that you can recall?
Probably not without naming names, and I'd probably rather not do that.
Fair enough. Thanks, Dudley.
Okay,
That
my
was,
pleasure.
That was great.
Thanks.